welcome back to the Compliance Kitchen podcast. This is Silvia. Today, I would like to take a look at a recent advisory that came to us from the Repo Task Force. So before we get into that, please note that what you hear on Compliance Kitchen is not legal advice and it should not be used as such. Now, going into today's topic. So this was around March 9 when the advisory was issued, and it is from the Repo Task Force. So a little bit of a background on this. Shortly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Australia, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, the UK, Japan, and the US created, together with the European Commission, the Russian Elites, Proxies, and Oligarchs, or Repo Task Force. This is a multilateral effort that has used information sharing and coordination to isolate and pressure sanctioned Russian individuals and entities. They also work closely with the European Commission's Freeze and Seize Task Force. So the Repo Task Force has so far successfully tracked Russian sanctioned assets, and they managed to restrict sanctioned individuals and entities from access to the international financial system. These efforts have denied regime insiders access to revenue streams and various economic resources that are used or were used to support the Russian war on Ukraine. So as a result, tens of billions of dollars of assets and property has been freezed or seized thanks to the work of the Repo Task Force. However, you're gonna always have some efforts to evade sanctions and what the task force is trying to accomplish. And so they've identified certain typologies of Russian sanctions evasion tactics and issued the advisory so that the professionals in the compliance area have some data points to work with when it comes to their own compliance programs and efforts. So the typologies that they identified in this advisory include the use of family members and close associates to ensure continued access and control over assets. Also, some of the more usual suspects like use of expensive real estate to hold value or to launder illicit proceeds through real estate, using complex ownership structures to avoid identification of the ultimate beneficial owner, and also the use of enablers to avoid direct involvement and to leverage their expertise, and also use of third-party jurisdictions, tax havens, that's not unusual, and also using false trade information to be able to ship and transship sensitive goods or dual-use items to Russia. So more on the family members and close associates typology. The advisory tells us that frequently Russian elites would transfer the beneficial ownership of legal entities and other property to their children in an attempt to ensure that they continue to control these assets and companies and continue to have access to wealth after the imposition of sanctions. There were instances also where the designated oligarchs directly transferred funds to family members in an attempt to hide these assets. Family members and close associates of designated persons, of course, are well placed to act as proxies and to facilitate this kind of sanction evasion and illicit financial activity. The asset transfers, it's been observed, go to family members and close associates, sometimes occur immediately before a person is put on sanctions lists or shortly thereafter, so that indicates sanctions evasion efforts. Also, depending on the facts and circumstances, the advisory tells us that there could be sanctions risks to these family members and close associates, as the repo members may seek to impose sanctions on these persons due to their facilitation of the evasion arrangements. Another typology, perhaps not unusual, is real estate, expensive real estate. So there has been an increase in the use of real estate as a vehicle to hold Russian wealth. And some of these investments and purchases also can be indicative of sanctions evasion efforts. More specifically, the advisory tells us that sanctioned Russian individuals and entities may launder or attempt to launder and obfuscate illicit proceeds through the purchase of real estate, often hiding again behind intermediaries, nominees, or straw purchasers, or behind opaque corporate structures such as legal entities or trusts. Another sign could be the purchase of real estate below or above its fair market value, as well as the use of offshore buyers who may have links to Russia. Also, acquiring real estate may sometimes assist with attempts to secure residency or citizenship in the country where the real estate is located, conveying possibly social respectability, providing access to materials and goods that can benefit the oligarchs and may appreciate in value. So what ties into these real estate purchases is frequently use of complex ownership structures to avoid identification of the UBO or the ultimate beneficial owner. And so this is frequently seen with money launderers and other illicit actors, where they use shell companies and other legal entities to avoid detection. And so similarly, the Repo Task Force has seen this typology with the Russian sanctioned individuals as well. Complex ownership structures, again, disguise the ultimate beneficial owner. So you can have a combination of legal entities and legal arrangements such as trusts, and it becomes very difficult to detect who is the beneficial owner, especially if parts of the structure are in opaque jurisdictions or tax havens. So the repo members have discovered trust arrangements that may have been designated to evade sanctions enforcement. These may indicate that someone involved in the trust, could be a law firm, could be a grantor, the trustee, settlor, or beneficiaries may be involved in sanctions evasion. And in some instances, the advisory tells us that sanctioned Russian individuals and entities and their proxies may also involve, again, relatives and close associates in these legal structures and arrangements to further obfuscate the ownership and relation to the assets. It is also not uncommon for these legal entities and arrangements to be, again, located in certain jurisdictions that benefit from these arrangements. They're tax and corporate formation havens, which again may afford a degree of secrecy to the Russian elites and their proxies by not disclosing any further details to outside parties about this corporate structure and the ownership behind it. The advisory also talks about the use of enablers, and they tell us that by utilizing certain persons in key professions, including those who frequently interact with the international financial system, the Russian oligarchs may leverage the ability of these enablers and open bank accounts, send and receive money, and also create corporate structures. The enabler often performs certain functions on behalf of the sanctioned person, and this allows the sanctioned individual continuing access to their resources. The enablers may operate in offshore financial centers, where it is common to form companies through such enablers. They can, again, it can include lawyers, accountants, tax advisors, as well as trust and company service providers. Another type of enabler, which I thought was interesting, that sanctioned persons may utilize, is an individual who can help consolidate investments from high net worth individuals or institutional investors. And so these types of individuals or entities help kind of aggregate investments for placement into a private fund that the individual investors may not be able to otherwise participate in, maybe because of they don't meet the asset requirement or income requirement, and so, or maybe they lack the relationships with advisors of these private funds. So the enabler would aggregate investments and then be able to place them into these types of funds. Lastly, there is the false trade information. So this is being used to facilitate dual-use items or sensitive goods shipments and transshipments with destination in Russia. Some Russian end users manage to gain access to sensitive goods and technologies. One of the methods is to list a freight forwarding business, often located in a third-party jurisdiction, as the final destination of the goods, even though the intent is to further transship these goods to final destination in Russia. The entities facilitating these transactions may often appear to have no affiliation with the transaction and may be utilizing a known transshipment point. So part of this type of transaction would be false documentation, bill of lading information, and other supporting documentation, fraudulent trade finance information, and so forth, to ensure that the goods can leave the country and reach the transshipment point and ultimately find their way into Russia. So there's more information and links to prior publications that you can find in this advisory if you're interested in taking a closer look. This was published, again, this was March 9, and it is published on the Treasury Department's website. So, as always, thanks for stopping by in the Compliance Kitchen, and I will talk to you guys next week again.